first of all, I want to ask you about the budget and some research that's been done by the Centre for Social Justice, which has calculated that families on modest incomes will be £18,000 worse off than jobless parents. So a family with 3 children that has at least one parent claiming universal credit will receive £46,000. Meanwhile, a family where both parents work with the average earnings will get only £28,000. In brief, do you think that is fair?
Well, look, what I think is fair is the decisions that we took overall at the budget, including on taxation.
I'm not asking what you think is fair overall. I'm asking whether you think is that fair? Is it fair? It's a very simple question. Is it fair that if you have 3 children and on benefits, you have more money than if you have 3 children and you're working? Is that fair?
Well, look, one of the benefit changes that we made at the budget was around the 2-child limit.
Alex Phillips wastes no time exposing the uncomfortable arithmetic at the heart of Labour's welfare policy, a system that financially disadvantages those who work and rewards those who don't. Murray's deflection underscores the political problem. Labour cannot justify the unfairness without admitting its design. This opening exchange sets the tone. Facts on the table, and a minister unable to defend them.
What would you say though to a family where 2 parents are working, one full-time, one part-time, with average wages, with 3 children, and they live next door to people who basically have almost a third more money than they do, but are not working? How would you say to them, oh, I'm sorry, that's just the way the cookies crumbled? How would you justify to them, listen, don't quit your jobs, we need you to carry on paying taxes, when actually they'd be better off if they did?
What I would say to that family is that you'll be getting £150 off your energy bill in April because of the changes that we've made. If you get prescriptions, those charges will be frozen because of choices we've made. If you take the train to work, your rail fares will be frozen because of changes that we made.
Well, that's great, but what if they don't want to take the train to work? It'd be more money for them if they didn't work. That's crazy, isn't it?
No, because the point is that they are getting help with the cost of living because of choices that we took.
But they would get more help if they weren't working.
The priorities in this budget were to cut the cost of living, to cut NHS waiting lists, and to cut government borrowing. And actually, one of the things that should annoy that family. Can I just say this point? Can I finish this point, please? One of the things that should annoy that family, and in fact everyone who pays taxes in this country, is that at the moment, 1 in every £10 of taxpayers' money has to be spent servicing the interest on debt. That's because we inherited a very high level of debt, and the interest on that takes over £100 billion of taxpayers' money a year. That's why cutting government borrowing is such a priority for us in this budget, so that taxpayers' money can be spent on taxpayers' priorities.
Okay, so I think you're right that when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, when you look at the interest we've been having to pay on that debt, it's pretty inconvenient, isn't it? So would that justify perhaps doing something that might affect the markets to alter that metric? For instance, let me think of something. I know, despite the OBR saying that you have a 4.2 billion surplus, instead you say to the country that you do not. In fact, there's a £22 billion black hole, which would then affect the markets. Does that justify it then?
Look, if I was on your programme today and we had a surplus, budget surplus of just a few £1 billion, you would rightly be saying to me, what on earth are you doing, James? And the markets would rightly be very concerned. One of our priorities going into the budget was to increase that headroom, to make sure we had sizable headroom. It's now £21.7 billion. We had to do that despite the fact that the OBR had downgraded productivity based on the previous government's record, which had taken £16 billion off revenues. We decided, and we were clear, that we had to increase that headroom. And you asked about what markets would say. I can absolutely guarantee you, if we had come out on budget day and had a headroom of just a few £1 billion, markets would not have responded well. But having a headroom of over £21 billion is something that puts us in a stronger position as a country.
At the time, so the Office for Budget Responsibility has been very clear on this, and it has said categorically that it told the Treasury where you work weeks ago that there was a £4.2 billion surplus. So what happened between that briefing, which no doubt landed on the Chancellor's desk, one assumes on your desk, perhaps even under the purview of the Prime Minister himself? What happened between the moment that the OBR said that there was a £4.2 billion surplus and the moment that Rachel Reeves said that there was actually a £30 billion black hole. Explain to me how all of a sudden the narrative has changed.
Well, firstly, Rachel never said those words you just attributed. What Rachel did is give a speech in early November where she said that, look, there's a big challenge in terms of productivity as a result of mishandling of Brexit and other actions of the previous government. That's going to have an impact. She was very clear we needed to increase the headroom, which was absolutely true, and based on the fact that the headroom was very low at 4.2 billion, increasing it was a real priority for us as a government. And she was clear that everyone would have to make a contribution, and that's exactly what we did in terms of our budget decisions around taxation. So Rachel was clear in her speech in November about what the challenges were and what about
this sort of rather unusual, unprecedented press conference on the morning of the budget, and then this also rather unusual and unprecedented early release of the OBR's report? I wonder if they might be connected, and the leaking out of reports that there's a £30 billion black hole. It's all very murky.
Hang on, sorry. No, I'm really going to have to correct you on this, because you said the unprecedented publication, I think, of the OBR report before the budget. That was a mistake made by the OBR. They have taken responsibility for that. That is on them. That is their responsibility. It's a very serious matter. They are doing a review into it at the moment, and the review is going to report to us tomorrow, and we will then have a chance to consider what that says.
The conflict between Alex Phillips and James Murray illustrates a fundamental paradox at the heart of Labour's budget narrative. The party seeks credit for compassion while refusing to accept the perverse incentives that its policies generate. Phillips starts with a straightforward comparison based on real numbers. Two families with identical needs, but vastly different outcomes depending only on whether they work. Murray's inability to say if this is fair highlights the weakness of Labour's stance. A government that claims to support working people cannot explain why working families should accept much lower wages than their work-free counterparts. As the conversation progresses, the gap deepens, not only in income, but also in credibility. Phillips frequently grounds the issue in empirical facts and public-facing effects, but Murray repeatedly resorts to boilerplate, cost of living assistance, frozen fares, and long-term debt strategy. These efforts, however, do nothing to alleviate the fundamental unfairness that Phillips discovered. When a family can improve its financial situation by quitting work, no number of subsidies can justify the underlying policy design. Murray never even tries to challenge that logic. Phillips brings up the OBR's interference, which sharpens the exchange. The fact that Treasury officials were informed of a £4.2 billion surplus weeks earlier, despite the public narrative focusing on a much larger black hole, raises serious transparency concerns. Phillips emphasises the OBR's remedial action, which was unprecedented in that the watchdog felt obligated to share internal figures to challenge the government's propaganda. Murray's remarks here are particularly telling. He denies using language that no one has directly credited, relies on procedural justifications, and recasts the existence of the excess as simply low headroom. However, he never explains why the people was not informed of the surplus before being urged to prepare for tax increases. Phillips also highlights the paradox in Labour's framing. If headroom was the goal, the government might have stated it outright, rather than conjuring a catastrophic black hole. Murray's resistance to admit the discrepancy, arguing that everything was clear and transparent, highlights the political propensity to defend process even when it contradicts truth. By the end, Phillips's core point goes unanswered. How can Labour justify a budget that penalises workers, conceals critical economic information, and relies on selective storytelling? Murray's evasiveness not only fails to settle the issue, but actually exacerbates it, revealing a government trying to justify the fairness or honesty of its own economic decisions. Let us know what you think down below in the comments.